Hi, how are you doing, everybody? Welcome. Happy Monday. I am live from Kentucky right now. I'm staring out a window that I was hoping to be able to do the show this morning from outside via, phone or iPad or something like that. But it literally, as I was getting set up, started raining. Not and I have to be completely honest, a beautiful kind of rain, a dare I say, lyrical form of rain. Not big thumb drops of rain, but that kind of steady mist, the kind that you often read about but don't get to experience in your life. That shows up in novels. That kind of rain. It was just cascading across the pond. There's some ducks. It's the foliage around here in Kentucky, and I'll post some pictures on my Twitter later on when we take the dogs for a walk. Is absurd. The amount, yeah, it's also very humid and muggy. And hi, everybody, welcome. Hello, hi, chat room. Hey, you're watching HAL Sparks Mornings Mega Worldwide. You know what? I jump right in, and I guess I figure because the show opens with the title for 5 minutes while the countdown happens, and I get set up. Uh, that people know that. That's my bad. I apologize. Welcome. Join in, gather round. If you're on Twitch, please subscribe. If you're on YouTube, give a thumbs up. Algorithm, blah 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 blah. That's it. Now, it's it's interesting to me. I've often said that one of the things that slows the roll on climate action is, quite frankly, the geography of the places that will be hit by it and the conversation happening in the meeting, or in the media rather, about the effects of climate change. Because, quite frankly, in most of the rural areas, with the exceptions of the plain states, which have there's a problem with like heat related wheat blight and that kind of stuff, or, limiting crop yields that like farmers care about, but that's a lot of land and one person or five people compared to, urban centers when heat hits. Or, and I would argue maybe there's, to some extent, the parts of Nevada, New Mexico, and Arizona and Texas that nobody gives a shit about. But for the most part, the the holdup in dealing with climate change happens in places that have, for years, been far cooler than necessary for, you know, foliage growth like you're seeing around here. And DC is one of those places. DC, if you go there, the Virginia area around Washington, DC is green unless there's snow. It is picturesque. It's a beautiful place to have a capital, but it's also, other than like it's hot out, not a place you're going to experience the effects of climate change for a long time. Long time. And the way drought affected parts of California would be affected, for example, if that makes sense. And so it's pretty easy for, I can see why people who live around, you know, Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, in this part of the country, especially right now, they've had a shit ton of rain. And the trees and the grass and the weeds and the plants and the foliage of all sorts is overgrowing. I mean, the roads look like they're under a canopy of greenery. Now, one would argue that this is exactly the planet, um, responding to the amount of carbon in the air, and plants feed on it, certainly, but there's a return on investment. There's an arc where it gets to be too much, and then the heat kills the plants that would remove the carbon from the air. And so there's a delicate balance there. And the argument is that we don't want to exceed that balance. Therefore, um, we need to curtail our fossil fuel use in manageable ways over a period of time, and prevent that line from happening, right? And there's a ton of people arguing that it's already happened, and there's evidence for and against that. And the like the UN climate change body basically says that exact thing. They have like 7 different models of where we're going to be, worst case scenario to best case scenario. And the best case scenario involves like one major volcanic eruption draws back, a lot of the carbon that we put in and that kind of, or puts a certain amount of particulate in the air that it cools the earth for a time. That's happened historically. So they have the whole spectrum in there. But it's abundantly clear that we play a part. That's the part every 97% of scientists agree on, that in the heating of the climate we are playing a part. How much of a part is the debatable part, and goes on, and that's where a lot of the fighting happens, but not that we are. And to put it simply, that if the earth, even through its motion through the galaxy, its rotation around the sun, its planetary wobble, all that stuff, if even with all that being true, we are still heating the place up unnecessarily, especially considering the technology available to us. So the idea would be is that mitigating our consumer related fossil fuel use primarily would be enough to drive that down. Meaning that if you just got cars largely electric, or at least 80% hybrid, that will help mitigate that. And over time, the cars that are entering the market are either at a higher efficiency rate because that's what the consumer wants, or hybrid or electric. You're going to see that roll in over the next decade anyways. But more effort is needed. So while I was driving around, it's just curious being in the environment. While I was driving around, um, I saw a Kentucky coal sticker on somebody's car, which is them pushing back on the idea that coal bad and blah blah blah. And I mean, they bought the whole clean coal nonsense. And there's processed coal that burns more efficiently than other coal, and we do that in the United States, whereas India and China don't even bother, and that's part of the argument. Now, the point is though, is that they've got a bumper sticker defending coal on their truck, and that in and of itself points to a psychological reflex that people are having about the conversation about climate change. And I've said a lot of times that folks like that, you can't even talk to them in terms of climate change because they think God's in charge of the weather, and that's that. But you can talk about them in terms of pollution. They understand sin and man-made mistakes and criminality and awfulness. You can talk to them on that term. So you want to mitigate the amount of pollution. Um, and the one area where I was like kind of struck by what was missing, and I'm sorry if I'm going on in a sort of extemporaneous philosophical rant at the beginning of the show about this, but it's been on my mind because I just saw it when I went to the grocery and came back, and that's a long drive from where we are. And if you could tell these people, you can make them understand that the goal is to take the regular consumer out of the fossil fuel business, that the just commuter drivers out of using oil, gas, and that the homes being taken out of the need for coal or natural gas to be burned to make energy. If you could remove all that, you're still going to have to use coal for the time being, for the next decade or so, for smelting plants, for example, which is when people are talking about we don't have enough renewables to run our factories. That's what they're talking about. They're to some degree, assembly plants were pretty close as far as the electrical needs of of those. I mean, there's going to be some like electric arc welders or whatever that are going to need higher power, but in general we're pretty close where we can start it's starting to balance its way out. But when it comes to a smelting plant, you need huge amounts of coal to burn to melt bauxite and make aluminum. And that's what they're talking about, by the way, in Kentucky: coal to run smelting plants. Then the conversation with those folks should be, and this is why, by the way, Fox pretends to not know the difference between zero emissions and net zero emissions, is that we're trying to get everybody to drive electric cars or move them in that direction to at least super efficient cars, so that when we use coal for smelting plants, the impact on the environment is negligible. And I feel like that's the missing part of the conversation with these folks. Also, welcome to Steve Bannon Fafo Day, as as Rick Wilson called it. Right now, as we yammer, there are people filling in on Steve Bannon's war room because he's in court. And according to, I think, hold on one second. I think according to his um, own like guest hosts, he's guilty. What's left of the Bannon defenses to prove from the prosecution? Did you receive the subpoena? Yes. Did you respect the subpoena? No. Case closed. Like, he's in contempt. Thank you, Leah, for reminding everybody to smash that like. Um, this is a fascinating, we won't know for a little while what this, entails. But this is just the first step because he's going to do this and then he's going to have to testify. And quite frankly, I got to tell you, it's going to be a replay of Mike Flynn. It's going to be plead the fifth, plead the fifth, plead the fifth, nonstop. Because his executive privilege does not cover him saying, I don't have to say that, because he was no longer a member of the administration. The same thing is true, by the way, of members of Congress. One of the biggest absurdities around this is the idea that members of Congress, another members of another equal branch of government, can somehow say, well, my discussions with the president, which is a separate, element of our governing from the body that I'm in, are somehow secret from the people, or can be, is ridiculous, unless it's for national security or something, which would be broadly across all discussions. But individuals in the House and Senate are not protected by, the advise and consent, or the advise and, I'm blitzing on the phrase of it. It's morning. It's like, my body clock is so wonky right now because of the travel we're doing. But the like the ability of like them to have frank discussions within the White House applies to cabinet members, his legal team, a few others, but it does not apply to members of Congress. That's dumb, because that's circumventing the will of their own individual voters. Because at at best, they're hiding these conversations that are not equal. And, as far as, if you're a member on a committee, or you can inform the rest of the body about what was said in chambers around some sort of committee hearing, the difference between that and them, they're where it's, like I said, equally hidden across the entirety of the Congress, versus they're just keeping this either from their own voters or from the rest of Congress. If you want to be in the administration, quit your job as a congressperson and join the administration. So yeah, it is a flank discussion. I agree, but with a Q, Trucker John, just for the record. So like when Jim Jordan or Matt Gaetz try this garbage, it's hilarious. It's also ridiculous when Jared, Ivanka, or Steve Bannon, or I guess Navarro to some degree after the fact, try to use this as an excuse after they've left the government. If you don't get, confirmed by the Senate and you have to leave the post because you were temporary, you can maybe argue that during the temporary period while you were expecting to be able to be a member of the cabinet, you had the right to, to secretly advise the president and keep that from the public. But that sure as hell doesn't apply if you weren't confirmed by the Senate and you are no longer in government. The private conversations with the president and his buddies have to be, to some degree, public record, minus, I guess, personal information. Because, I mean, that's your quick trip to oligarchy. That's where he just gets to bring in his buddies and go, hey, I just talked to the DOD, and we're going to move our military facility out of this country and move it to this country. So if you want to buy some property, I would buy it in the new country and along this area. It's really cheap right now, and I know we're going to be protecting it for the next decade. So, effectively like a real estate form of insider trading, which Trump himself, there's no question the Jared stuff is a participation in that very thing. Like that's how Jared and Ivanka guaranteed themselves a certain amount of money. And the Bahrain UAE deal, and the Abraham Accords, which is really just commercial flights going to and from Bahrain and UAE in exchange for $50 billion worth of military aid, more than we've given uh, Ukraine, by the way, to this point, guaranteed over 10 years to both of these countries. That's effectively what they used it for. Now they know where to buy um, property. Now they know where to start businesses. Now they know where business will start and flow, and will flow back and forth from these two countries. And they knew before other people that So if you allow people who are not in government, especially, like, here's the thing: childhood friends hanging out in the conversation, the generalized nature of the conversation. Do I think there's a possibility the president slips a note to his buddy in case the house is bugged like Nixon? Do I expect that can or would happen, especially in a Trump White House, or similarly in a Dick Cheney house where he had, was it Rumsfeld who had his own like secret soundproof booth where other people couldn't hear his conversations? That kind of shit uh, has to be policed inside government. But do I expect a certain amount of it to happen because humans are humans? Yeah. But you don't give it a green light by saying, yeah, you can basically come in, anybody who was, you can bring somebody in, hire them for 2 days, fire them. Now they don't have to log their communications. But from that point on, they have executive privilege for their conversations. Get the fuck out of here. That doesn't work. It's absurd. And that's the argument that Steve Bannon is making, or has been trying to make in court to keep him out. That I worked there for a little while, so after I stopped working there, now now it applies to me. So I just like the whole concept that it's goofy. It was Scott Pruitt, thank you, the EPA guy, and Trump had a soundproof thing in his office. Dick Cheney had that as well. So these booths, yeah, these booths are in the building. Now, some of it might be like the idea that you'd have an emergency skiff conversation and you can't get where you're going, and it could be an emergency, but other people don't have clearance, and Trump let a bunch of assholes into the White House dropping bugs everywhere, and they don't know that they could clean all of them. So they created these things to protect themselves against Trump's, loose lips sinking ships. Trump administration gave power to people that had no business having that power, including him. Well, I mean, there's certainly a mechanic to that in terms of, like I said, Ivanka and Jared working in government, but not technically working in government. I mean, it's just a recipe for insider trading. And that unprecedented documentary, how many people have actually seen that? That's on, is it on Hulu or Amazon Prime? I watched it, the series. It's more about him and the kids and how they run the company, which sounds to me like it reads more like like a Kardashian kind of a special than an actual breakdown of what Trump is like. Because it was like they shot all this stuff with the kids and then showed it to him, and he's like, "Good, oh good." She's watching the footage they shot of Don and Eric and Ivanka that they edited on an iPad. It's odd. Discovery Plus, thank you. Yeah, so it's on Hulu, and Discovery Plus is a sub channel of that. But that, I mean, to me, the edited version of all that footage looks like a puff piece for them to help build the Trump brand, which is exactly what they were brought on to do, quite frankly. And they probably had the right to sign off on the edit. They had to show it to him, so might as well film him watching the edit. So they know he signed off on it, so he can't sue them later, which, but like we've seen him do this kind of crap before, so it's no surprise to anybody. But so the footage that they're giving to the committee that was edited out or whatever is more about, is more valuable than watching the show. I didn't learn anything particularly from that other than Trump looks really gross up close. And he looked particularly orange on the days they were filming him. He looked like he looked like his skin looked like orange peel. It's not good. Um so yeah. By the way, welcome. Hi. Those of you that are rolling in and joining us. This is How Sparks Mornings Mega Worldwide, and it's Monday. Boy, is it Monday. It's more Monday for some people than others. I would argue that today is more of a Monday for Steve Bannon, of all people. So, let's see. I want to pull up my trends. I'm going to keep today's show, the morning show, a little bit tighter, and I'm going to do the afternoon show earlier today. And I apologize for that, but I'm in Kentucky, and the time difference is such that it would land right in the middle of dinner time, and we're going out to eat tonight as a family. So I'm going to bring the show up. I hope that's okay. So anybody who normally watches it later, I mean, I apologize for some of an hour missed of chat interaction, but you guys understand, and that's why I love you. So this is a big part of the news today. Is this fact that there were 400 cops at Uvalde and they didn't move in? I mean, there were like the ones who finally moved in were Border Patrol guys, which was bizarre. Um, anyways, I'm sure you've seen that, that breakdown of the news, and um, the take on this is, I think it's more about the delicate nature of a circumstance like this, and almost like this reminds me of like pre 9/11 airplane response, because the old response pre 9/11 was they're going to take hostages, they're going to make demands, they want the airplanes flown to another place, and people are going to come on there. And so the response about dealing with terrorists, even if they're in the air, is they're going to have to land and refuel. And when they refuel, we'll start negotiations. We'll try and hold the plane. We'll try to trade for some people. We'll slow the process down. We'll see if we can get somebody inside, and some intel on it. And over, we'll have like a 1978, I'm hijacking this plane and taking it to Cuba attitude. Post 9/11, that went away. And Uvalde's response seemed a lot more like they were treating it as a hostage situation than a school shooter, which is bizarre. I think intercourse PA is trending. Yes, that was the other thing that was trending. We'll get to that in a second. This is the systemic failures thing. So, I'm not excusing what they're doing, but it seems like they fell into that zone, and a bunch of other people were screaming like, do something right now, because he's not there. He doesn't have demands. He's a shooter. None of these guys have demands except after the fact, or they have some sort of manifesto. A lot of them don't expect to leave. So this, one of the most recent shooters, the Highland Park shooter, has been suicidal for a good period of time. So a lot of these guys, that's how they're doing it. There's an argument. Well, we'll talk about that later. But we'll move on to this, just because you're not going to be able to think about anything while the word intercourse is on the screen. And yeah. Roman Polanski fled U.S. as judge planned to renege on plea deal, transcript reveals. Okay, this is the intercourse is just trending because it's trending. And this maybe this is why. Emergency contraceptives prevents pregnancy. These do not cause an abortion. IUD, Plan B, Ella USP method. All must be used within 5 days of intercourse. Sooner the better. That's why it's called the morning after pill. When the extra small condoms arrive. All right. Stop having sex with Republicans. Maybe that's why they're uptight. Again, this is when trends trend because it's trending. Yeah, and this is intercourse PA. This is ironically named considering the nearby population. Oh, intercourse, the penguin. And then, of course, yeah, these were trending at the same time. I mean, if well, you know what I was going to say. Um, I is Dave was David Crosby mean? Um, oh, I see. I drew iconic musician David Crosby. I spent a lot of time on this one. I would love to share. Oh, Jesus. So somebody did a where's the real one? He was the most arrogant, obnoxious person I'd ever met and totally disdainful of my cultural naivete. John Denver writing about David Crosby in his bio Take Me Home. Um, oh, is this the art? Did a picture of you, thanks for the music. And then, uh, uh, life is too short to be mean to strangers online. Go outside and look at some trees. She's absolutely right. We adore Linda Carter. First crush, not gonna lie. As my son would say. My tells my kids, it looks like a stained glass window of him. Um, David Crosby had an unkind response to a piece of fan art sent his way. Um, what was his at this point? His response is so buried. Um, we have to. Oh, here it is. I guess this is it. This is the weirdest painting of me I've ever seen. Don't quit your day job. Jesus Christ. Again, this looks like they were going for like a stained glass window style. Yes, I'm just. By the way, I've received some drawings of me over time with varying degrees of quality and effort, and I would like to say there's beauty in all of them. Just the fact that somebody wants you're in a position in life where people want to draw a picture of you and mean it, you know, and they're not sending you they didn't sit on a Xerox machine and send you the picture and go, "Here's I drew you." Like if they're not doing that, why be a dick? Well, I guess, and that's maybe it's it. Why act like a dick would be my response or your response, or indeed Linda Carter's response in some ways. The reality I think we all have to face is that there are folks out there like David Crosby who are indeed pricks, and they're not acting. That's just who they are, and they have no interest in cleaning that up. Um, Amelia Clark says her brain was has quite a bit missing after 2 aneurysm. Oh dear. Um, she had 2 brain aneurysms while filming the show. Dear Lord. I mean, the fact that she's alive and communicating at all is the amount of my brain that is no longer usable. It's remarkable that I'm able to speak sometimes articulately and live my life completely normally with absolutely no repercussions. Well, thank God we have a lot of dead zone in our brains, and neurologically we can reroute a lot of things. But good for her. COVID-19, that's always like this one's always in my feed. And this, okay, Tristan Thomas having no problem finding companionship, church degrees. Oh God, fuck off. I don't care. And then this is like Drew Barrymore on TikTok, uh, walking around in the rain, being happy. I mean, it's adorable, except for the fact that TikTok is malware. Drew, use YouTube Shorts, please. Try Snapchat. Let's all pool our money and restart Vine. Okay, Satanists got bumped down. Cobra is trending, and if it's not the movie, I'm going to be very disappointed. Satanists. Republican Senate candidate charged with making false child trafficking allegations. Oh, this is the guy who um, made child trafficking allegations against the organization he was in. Is this what I'm saying? Um, the Satanist Department of Education. Bit harsh. Oh, I see. Yeah, like we get in by the time you get into some of these, the joking has already started. So this is uh Maryland run. Let's see. Ryan, get out of here. Ugh, the gunk. The amount of I don't want to click the things. Go away. All right, here we go. Republican Senate candidate charged with making false child trafficking allegations. U.S. Senate candidate Maryland running as John McGreevey. Ryan Dark White. Look, pick your favorite form of chicken and just eat it. Stop. I mean, try to learn to share. Charged with making false child trafficking. Weird that he's running as John McGreevey. All right. Concocted the story for his own political agenda. Okay. A Republican candidate for U.S. Senate in Maryland has been arrested on charges of making false report of child trafficking. Oh, and the rest of Q world is going, sucks to be you, bro. Ryan Darkwhite, 54, was jailed at the Harford County Detention Center following his arrest on Friday. The county sheriff said in a statement, while he's running under the alias John McGreevey in Tuesday's GOP primary seeking to challenge Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen, who also faces a primary contest because you know, because we've already gotten there. This is why wouldn't the Donner Party in the middle of the snowstorm just go, let's have an arm wrestling contest? Or talk about who's taller in the middle of. All right. Um, said White, an employee at an adult bookstore in Edgewood, Maryland, as you do, falsely reported in April that a girl aged 10 to 12 was being trafficked by a man at the bookstore and forced him to perform. Oh, good Lord. The sheriff's office identified both the male and the young girl and said investigators found no evidence supporting White's allegations. It is shameful the candidate for public office would make up such a story and use it to further his own political agenda. He looks like, as Trump would say, central casting for a Republican. Gawler also denounced an unnamed political candidate who wasn't charged in the investigation. Is even more appalling that another individual who's running for a law enforcement position would embrace such an obviously false narrative in an effort to gain political traction, nothing more. The Baltimore Sun reported White had been making joint appearances with Andy Cool, a Republican sheriff's candidate in Baltimore County. Yes. Black, white, and cool. I can't wait for it's like a buddy cop show. Cool's campaign website warns of a multi-state trafficking operation and says John McGreevey and I go undercover to expose these sick and heinous crimes against children. We must bring these criminals to justice. And if they don't exist, we'll make some. White has previously said he started working at the bookstore as part of an undercover operation. This goes back to like the anti-porn stuff from like evangelical groups back in the early 80s and late 70s where like I have watched every frame of this disgusting pornographic filthy movie twice and I do not understand, ladies and gentlemen, how this is allowed in our country. I am of course going to be compiling a vault of said material for a future legal case. Oh, Kimberly, thank you so much. Yay. I get it on with how sparks are. Yay. Thanks, Kimberly. Gawler described the resources in his office wasting investigating the false report. Beyond grateful this young girl is safe, but extremely disappointed someone would attempt to discredit and disparage the work of dedicated men and women at the Harford County Sheriff's Office and Child Advocacy Center. Fear-mongering and antagonism. It's like this is the satanic panic weaponized and turned into a career. Good Lord. Meanwhile, mm-hmm. But good to remember that a substantial portion of the insider intel on so-called satanic ritual abuse in the ages came from Christian comedian Mike Warnke, seems to have made it all up to sell books and tickets. Yeah, that's exactly it. Like this is the same thing. It's just they've turned it into it was sort of a cottage industry, and they've turned it into a political function. And then, all right, Cobra, please be the movie, please be the movie, please be the, no. UK heatwave, Boris Johnson told to turn up for work as he is set to miss his third Cobra meeting. Isn't he, hold on. I don't, all right, this is a British, there's climate board. Ask why Boris Johnson was able to find the time for a joyride on an RAF jet, was unable to find time to attend any of the Cobra meetings in the heat wave. The spokesman says that it is important to the PM to have firsthand experience of how fighter pilots work. Yeah. Considering that the vast majority of circumstances, or tactics rather, that we're using to deal with climate change are relatively long term, and there are no immediate solutions. I don't know how to stress that to everybody. Like, and again, more reason why not to panic and maintain your clear head, because it ain't going to help. Screaming for help when you're alone in the woods and something is happening to you, valuable. Screaming in the woods when you're alone and no one's coming to help you and you know it will draw animals, not. Screaming in the woods when you don't know where you are and there might be through the trees over there a restaurant and you were just there a second ago and you know you can walk there but you're walking in the wrong direction, also not helpful. Panic is seldom useful. Keep calm and carry on. So the idea that, by the way, are we? This is like Rex Tillerson not showing up for stuff, or Rick Perry. Do we really think the Cobra meeting is harmed by Boris Johnson not showing up? First of all, he's not gonna act on what they're saying or take it any more seriously than he already is, and he's on his way out the door. And secondly, is anybody at the Cobra meeting thinking that Boris Johnson's going to have an idea in the middle of the freaking meeting that's going to go, "Oh, thank God you were here, Boris"? Yeah, but you don't want to scare a skunk. Exactly. You know, it was interesting because my son and I went swimming a couple of times this weekend, um, and we're going to go out in the canoe later and do a little bit of fishing if the rain, simmers down. It doesn't have to simmer down entirely. We just don't want to be out there in case if there's a thunderstorm. But one of the things, like, he's been like learning to go underwater and get more comfortable with that, and he's not using, he hasn't used floaties for a while, but he'll use a pool noodle if he goes into the deeper areas. He's pretty skinny, like like his old man was at the time, at that age. And so we just sink like a stone. You have to be able to swim and have a lot of strength to swim if you're skinny. You just do. There's no buoyancy in my family. So what I was, and he'll go underwater and then he'll have sort of a moment of scare and he'll come up as kids do. And it's getting less and less over time, which is great. And we had a conversation about how when you're in a situation where you think you're drowning or you might be drowning, the panic is your enemy. You're fighting that more than you're fighting the water, because you can actually hold your breath for over a minute. More than likely, you can go without oxygen even if you were in trouble for a couple of minutes. But the more you panic, the more oxygen you use, and the less efficiently you use it. And also, you're not solving the problem. You're wearing yourself out. You're scaring yourself. Your adrenaline is kicking in. You don't need extra energy to be able to swim. That's within you. You need to use it more efficiently. So you're really fighting your own emotions towards the water you're in, more than the water itself. Relax, don't panic, don't die. Exactly. Um, thanks. Well, because you want to prepare your kids for situations where you're not going to be there. And one of the things that I think is most crucial in situations that are life and death, that regular human beings in a civilized society find themselves in, you're trapped in a car that's fallen into a lake, or you're fallen into the water yourself, or you're lost, or you're any or there's you hear gunshots, in a place you're in. Those kind of things, when they happen, the panic often will sometimes kill more people than the actual thing itself. And if you could hold it together and go, okay, what do I really got to accomplish here? Because most of the time, especially when it's in a pool, you only have to swim 6 feet. And you know you can swim 6 feet. You can go 6 feet in one direction. You're going to hit either the edge of the pool or a shallower part of the pool where you can stand up. And if you think that in that moment, instead of like, I'm under the water, and what am I going to do? If you can go, all I have to do is swim 6 feet, you'll calm yourself. You'll be more efficient. You'll get yourself up a little bit so you can get a breath. And then you will start going in the direction you need to go, and you will save your own life. And then if there are other people who are panicking, you can contribute to getting them out. You can get to the edge of the water. And this is from personal experience. In the creek that's behind our house in Kentucky when I was growing up, my buddy Kurt, who I've talked about on the show, passed away recently. He and I, and my buddy Mike Brewer were swimming in our creek, and there was a drop off, and we just weren't tall enough for that water at that point. We were really little, and we just went bloop. And he and I were both not strong enough swimmers and too skinny to float. And I very distinctly remember when we both dropped off, and because we were kind of racing out to this, like there was a stump out there, and we're going to swim over, touch it, and swim back or whatever. And then we were basically kind of swim, but with your feet on the ground, like kids do, where you're like kind of swimming, but your feet are really touching, the bottom of the pool or the creek bed or whatever. And we both went into the deep part that we didn't know was there at the same time. And I was underwater, and I very distinctly remember this moment. My hands were above the water, and I was doing this, and I looked over, and my buddy Mike was just drinking in water. He had his hands up like I did over the water trying to do this, but he was just sucking the water into himself. And I was like, I think I was 9, maybe 10. And I very distinctly remember having a moment where I went, if I don't learn to swim, we're both dead. If I don't start swimming right now, we're both dead. And so I started dog paddling up, like literally like this, because I was like, I'd seen animals do it, I'd seen rats do it, I'd seen cats do it, I'd seen deer do it, I'd seen all kinds. I'm like, if it works for them and they've got hooves, it'll work for me with my hands. Like this is how my um mind was thinking at 9 years old. And I just dog paddled the shore, and there was a stick on the shore. Um, by the way, Kurt dealt with stress by laughing, so he thought it was funny, and we were both done. So he wasn't doing anything. He was literally laying on the beach, rolling around. So it's a horrifying, yeah, it's terrible for it. But again, thinking first, we think first and then we feel. And anybody who tells you different is selling you something. You have made a decision about what stuff means that hurt you or excite you or whatever. They don't do it on their own unless it's literally a chemical reaction. So anyways, so I was wondering that there's a stick on the thing. I can still see Mike's hands. He's still doing this. Like, so I take this stick that's on the beach, and I reach out and I bang it between his hands so he can feel it. I start hitting, his hands are like this, and I'm just hitting the stick against his hands. And eventually he grabbed it like that with both his hands. And I just pulled this way. And then I yelled at Kurt to help me pull him forward. And he we were both maybe a foot from where the shallow water was. But that was enough. And he was able to pull him forward. He obviously, his feet hit the ground, and he was able to start like kind of crawling up to the beach, and he just barfed out all this water. He just coughed it out like that as he was, and then he just kind of fell over and started coughing, and we were both crying, and because we're little kids, and it was adrenaline, and it was really scary. Um, but I mean, that's a cruel life lesson about panic. But man, it was programmed into me at an early age that having control of yourself having command of your emotions and respect for them. It doesn't mean shoving them down. It doesn't mean stuffing them. And in my family, we've always had this thing, and I've mentioned it a couple times, but we'll, you know, we'll cry when the march is done. That when you're going through something difficult, there's no shame in feeling the sorrow and the emotion of something, but get through it first. You don't get points for collapsing. It's, and, in my family, we just don't reward it. If you really are just falling apart, we'll help you. But understand, after the fact, we're going to have a talk about why you needed to be helped when everybody else was, pulling the log or whatever, pulling the weight. And, my dad kind of, who's, he's here and he's my kid and him are hanging out, grandpa, grandkid time, which is good. Had this thing about like, um, we'll love you and we'll care for you, but we're not going to pity you. And, you know, to me, that is loving because it informed me with a belief that I am capable of handling stuff, even stuff that's arguably outside of my current control, is that I can get there. That the next time I went in the creek, you like you can be damn sure I was a better swimmer. That the next time we were at the pool, I was doing laps back and forth without putting my feet on the bottom to go, I need to be able to swim. If I'd have been swept down the creek, we'd have been completely fucked. So I was aware of that because of that experience. I was also my family kind of tuned me to that. But, and that sort of keyed in to what I would call optimistic stoicism. So I like we get into these conversations about these kind of things, but when it comes to like climate, uh, it is so important to have a cool head when the temperatures are getting hot. That that because a lot of people most people have a limit to how much they can care, that their willpower gets exhausted. That happens a lot. You get people to recycle, you get people to exercise and eat right, and there's a certain point where they, even like pro athletes who, weight trainers or whatever, need a cheat day because you run out of willpower. You can't try harder all the time. And the problem with the argument around climate change is that a lot of times you're either preaching to the choir or talking to people who didn't have the willpower to start with to recycle and buy a hybrid, or culturally averse to the idea. And then you're asking them to try even harder and they're not gonna hear you. And it's not, and in many ways it's because they've reached their limit. Now, I believe that's their current limit, and they could eventually learn to have those skills, but you're not going to force them to. You're not going to get that person who has that coal sticker on her truck or his truck, whoever it was, to get it right away, no matter how much you scream at them. As a matter of fact, you're engaging their need for willpower to not punch you in the face when you're arguing with them like that way. It's why I infuse a lot of my arguments with comedy and silliness and embarrassment for them, because I hope that their own self-worth will kick in and they would rather not be seen as a moron, and therefore they'll clean some of that stuff up. But I don't, you know, I try to keep that at bay. We all have our, our breaking point, I suppose. But it's crucial that you understand that a lot of these people are the stack of willpower that they are, they are exercising in the normal part of their life, a lot of people are riding right on the edge of it. They're doing everything they can up to the, um, right up to the edge of their ability. And a lot of people, they snapped a while back because it was too much and they don't have the capacity for it. So it's one of the reasons why the government, city, state, federal, local, part of the process that to help these things along is you pass a bill so that you can have recycling bins at everybody's house if you want one, and we'll take care of it. Just put the right stuff in there, and you don't have to you don't have to go to the recycling center because it was too much willpower on top of show up for work, don't beat your kids, for a lot of these people. They were managing to do all these things, and then you're asking them to do, and that was the break point for them. England has released its first heat advisory ever, temperature sitting 101 Fahrenheit. Yeah, I mean, Robert, we're seeing the same thing in like, look how sunny Seattle is now. Like, the weather has changed so much up there that you could never have grunge. But again, these weather systems they're not disappearing, they're shifting. So south of them, it's just like here, it's getting wetter all the time. There's flash floods and all kinds of crazy stuff because we're mucking with the natural flow of things. The heat, we're basically, it's the heating of the oceans that are affecting these weather patterns largely, and that's, contributing to lack of cloud cover and all kinds of other things. And if we can mitigate those things, there's not going to be even panicking about England having its first heat advisory ever. Ain't going to help it change. But serious, focused, and calm resolve to deal with these things amongst everybody who cares. Because what's happening right now is the belief that there are so many people who don't care that we have to compensate by verbally over caring in that regard, instead of mitigating, like communicating with the person that we're communicating with. We're screaming at the choir. Right. Yeah, that's right, Mark. Day by day, step by step. And what you'll find is, if your focus is on those kind of things, you will bring along more of the people you need to bring along to get, if not an electric car, a hybrid, to, if not, turn their lights off and recycle and stuff like that, to eventually take advantage of the solar savings that people can get by putting it on their house and basically taking their house off as a spike off the grid amongst the millions of homes. If the solar panels on a house will take that, especially when you need air conditioning the most, when it's hot, you'll take that weight off the grid. You'll take that one stone out of that side of the scale. And that's the progress we have to make. And again, it seemed the the panic crowd and the don't give a fuck at all crowd are inexorably linked in a lot of ways, because this is the emotional and intellectual capacity of these people being spiked. They're overwhelmed by the concept. And these people are equally overwhelmed by the concept that this will be that emergencies are of different categories, and some require long focused resolve. And we have been moving in that direction. I mean, you can look at the fits and starts in humanity, but Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House, and Ronald Reagan took them down. And it took us another 25 years to kind of get back to that point. But once we did, the advances have been exponential. Let me show you what you guys know that, let's see, let me see if there's the news. This is, I want to see yeah, here it is. Solar cells made with silicon are not flexible, largely. They can be, but they have to be segmented to do it. Whereas perovskite, which is another way of making solar cells, is completely flexible. It's just up till now, it's been too delicate. Silicon's been a lot more resilient, but perovskite can be more efficient. It just it gets destroyed by sunlight over time. So you have to mix it with, you have to put a chemical base of like chlorine and selenium and other stuff over top of it to keep it from decaying. And it can absorb perovskite, unlike silicon-based solar cells, can absorb way more of the spectrum of sunlight and turn it into energy. Okay. This week, let me move this down here so you can see it. There was a huge move when solar cells, the kind we use regularly, broke the 30% efficiency barrier. And a lot of people were like, it's going to top out at 45, it might be 50, we'll keep, grinding at it. And we've been working on solar cells in their current iteration using silicon for a long time. So the science is fairly settled, and the advances will be slow and incremental over time and have a lot more to do with how you salvage the energy made without it, baking off, like attaching water pipes to it and using it to heat the water as well, those kind of things, where you're actually using the inefficiency of just, baking sunlight for other purposes other than generating electricity. And think about how long the solar cells we currently use took to get to 30%. Perovskite, these particular ones, using silicon as a backup or as a support layer, a lot less of it, broke the 30% barrier in under, I want to say, 4 years. They went from 2 or 3% efficiency to 30% efficiency in just under 4 years. This is, I made myself tiny. This is an article. No, I gotta look at the actual article. I keep trying to move the screen. Scientists have broken the efficiency record for tandem silicon perovskite solar cells, surpassing the milestone of 30% for the first time. The new record takes the technology beyond the upper limits of silicon alone, using low-cost and scalable materials. Perovskite is cheaper. It's more readily available. It's made and processed with a more efficient use of energy itself than the silicon power cells are. Silicon has long dominated the solar cell industry thanks to solid combination of efficiency, durability, cost, and ease of manufacture. Decades of technological advancements have continuously increased the efficiency of these solar cells, but with current devices approaching the material's theoretical limit of 29.4%, there is so much room left for growth. Perovskite is quickly emerging as an alternative, but it doesn't mean silicon is being replaced. Instead, the two materials work very well together, absorbing different wavelengths of light. Silicon excels at red and infrared light, while perovskite focuses best on green and blue parts of the spectrum, although it gathers more of the entire spectrum than silicon does. This means that tandem silicon perovskite solar cells have the potential to reach efficiencies higher than either can achieve alone. In 2018, the record of efficiency was 25.2. Which is broken at 27.7, then 29.15. Another advance in 2021 pushed it closer to 30%. And now the milestone has been crossed for the first time. Researchers at EPFL and CSEM have developed tandem silicon perovskite solar cells with high efficiencies using two different designs. This is only one of the many stories that you're going to see if you care about this stuff or if it shows up. Over the next 2 years. This is an enormous switch. And this is happening all the while England is experiencing a heat wave, and it is raining like a motherfucker here, like it's Seattle. It's constantly like this light spitting rain, and the trees here are growing exponentially, and they're everywhere, and they're getting thicker, so they're not going to break as much. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that's happening with the foliage again in areas where people aren't going to take it that seriously. They've had some hot weather here this summer too. I mean, Kansas was beating Las Vegas a few dates this summer, heat wise. But all the while this stuff is happening, kids, there are people busting their ass every day to make this all better. And the keep calm and carry on, and the long-term commitment is what's required. Putting solar farms on large. Let's see. The company I work for is putting solar farms on their large campuses. The local main campus has a small solar farm. Yeah, you're going to find that most building tops are going to have solar as it gets cheaper, especially as not just as an energy source, but they'll make canopies out of it. The interesting thing about perovskite versus silicon, like I said, is the flexibility of it. So you can put it on. The idea is that you would make the surface of a car covered in perovskite solar cells eventually, where it's not going to be as efficient as the full panels themselves, but it will eventually reach 12 to 15% efficiency, and therefore, if your car's parked outside, there will be an element of trickle charge all the time. That over just sitting there while it's parked in the parking lot at work, as long as there's some sunlight hitting it, it's gonna, enough to power the radio and the GPS and maybe the electronics in the car for the ride. So that takes that much more off the battery. And again, we've talked about like battery power, um, um, uh, and let me find this real quick. Um, the Yeah, when we looked at this way back in May, I'll show you the same article in case some people weren't around back then. But what a terrible page. Stretch out, stupid. There you go. This is the article that I was like there are multiple articles like this. It's just an example of it, but it's basically the same thing as the NDBs and nuclear diamond batteries, where they're taking carbon-14. When they put it up against the diamond, the radiation that's emitted can be used as electricity. And so right now they're really small, but that's a scalable technology as well. And you can use more intense materials as well. They'll start experimenting with other things besides carbon-14 and other things to create more energy, because the diamond shielding around it is durable, largely bulletproof and explosion proof. You can make these batteries that are effectively indestructible, and on a much bigger scale. So in the future, in theory, if you buy a computer monitor, it will have built into it an NDB. It'll have a nuclear battery in it that's minor, that doesn't, that the wavelength of the nuclear material that you're talking about is on the scale of what plants put off and what you experience just being outside. And it's normal to the human body, and yet even still encased in diamond. So you're not gonna. It's even if it leaked, you would experience a level that your body is arguably used to. But the idea of it leaking, you'd have to like fire a bazooka at your monitor. You'd be more in danger from flying glass than you would from the material in the battery. But that everything you buy is, the smaller it is, the smaller battery you would need to drive it, and there'll be a scale element of it where the size of the battery and this kind of thing, it doesn't have to be round like a AA battery. It can be laid out as a dual sheet where there's two layers of diamond and the stuff is in between, and the cathode and the diode are on either side of it like this, and that's how they power everything. And they don't need to be recharged. The energy is created by the constant radiation from the material bouncing photons, and that is effectively the battery. And the battery comes, and I mean, we're going to need a new word for it because it's technically not a battery. A battery is meant to be a recharged thing. But eventually, every electronic device you get will no longer need a power cord. Eventually, light bulbs will have a teeny little NDB in them, and then that'll be that. And they'll either be, you can turn them on, by, a button on them, like light fixtures will have something that will effectively either tap them or signal them through, just a, hey, turn on, hey, turn off, hey, turn on, hey, turn off. And that's it. You'll have a digital IO circuit that's like a minuscule, if non-existent, transmit wire that goes to your house, or God knows what else, to your Neuralink. But the point is, all those bulbs will have their own battery in them. They won't be hooked up to anything else either. This is the technology that is coming in the next 10 to 15 years. And at that point, almost all of humanity's carbon input into the environment is going to be gone. In the meantime, we have to make sure that we do as little damage as possible to species and human beings and territories that will be on the brink until that can happen. But we are not going to conserve our way out of this problem. That's never going to happen unless you want to kill 1 billion people within 7 months in the developing world. And if that's your cost benefit analysis for fighting climate change, it's nuts. We are going to innovate our way out of this. We are going to solve this through new technologies, carbon capture, and even carbon capture at some point. You watch, if you're my age or younger, more than likely in your lifetime, you will see a couple of amazing things that are, I would say on par with telephone lines going up in the Old West and in the industrial age, the pre-industrial age. Think about all the power lines you see and all the phone lines you see, and understand that the amount of human activity needed to put those up was an extraordinary change for people. My grandmother had to ride into the town in Rowan, Ohio, and use the one phone in town. She had to hand crank it. And in her lifetime, they went from telegraph to the phone there, to the availability of phones in homes, dial phones, push button phones, flip phones, smartphones in her lifetime. And one of the big changes, and now we're kind of in this stasis of smarter and smarter and smarter phones, right? Flatter, smaller, smarter. That's what they're going to work on. MVP products, minimum viable product, all the time. But in our lifetime, in this big stretch, we're going to see the removal of all of those wires, the reclamation of all of that stuff. In your city, your power lines are all underground. Julie, in some areas they cannot, due to the that old sticking point physics. Depends on the ground, depends on the content of the soil and the environment, and not to mention if you've got granite between one place and another that you would have to blast through it to do it. Have been watching the tech develop in the series Peaky Blinders. Phones from 2 pieces to 1 to smaller. Yeah, we are going. Yeah, moisture absolutely has a place in that. How was this brought about by military conflict that moved the technology forward? Some of it, a good portion of it. Certainly the bigger advances, satellites, internet, those kind of things are part of military spending. As weapons got more dangerous, the materials to communicate and set up defenses got more important and had to be quicker and clearer over time. All of the technology in this camera I'm using, this little Logitech Brio, That's a military lens. All these lenses were made for the military, like originally. And so we've benefited from this because first order business, don't die while we're working on this shit. So military spending is going to contribute to the whole world's advanced spending most of the time. You can even argue that the space race between the United States and Russia was indeed a military endeavor, even though the idea was that no shots were supposed to be fired. The idea was just a technological race, but it was indicative of fall off technology. Whatever you could get to get you into space would certainly get you to faster airplanes that were more resilient and all that kind of shit. DOD has said that climate change is a serious issue. No question, right? And a lot of the technology, by the way, that I'm talking about has been furthered by military spending. Some of the budget where we're like, oh my God, our military spending is through the roof. One of the reasons why it's as high as it is because the race against time in the manufacture of more and more advanced technologies. Well, a lot of that technology is around resilience. Projectiles and targeting systems, you can refine those over time, but you're not going to reinvent the missile to some degree. You're going to make them smarter. You're going to make them hit what they want. But that's the purpose of it. That you're not changing. The question is, what does it take to fuel your tank? And if you need a tank at all, what would be obviously having to refuel it? Fuck that. Solar panels are not going to be enough to do it for the time being. So what technology other than nuclear tanks are you going to come up with that can drive these things? And that's where they're rushing. How do we get these things? And basically we've done it with the naval fleet. We've got nuclear subs and nuclear carriers. And that's where they've solved that problem. And so micronuclear as a power source exists already. The amount of power drawn from it is extraordinary on these, in a sub or on a ship. And a version of that that didn't use something that decayed into a form of uranium you can use for a bomb could power cities very efficiently and cleanly, largely, in terms of the climate. The only difference is, what do you do with the waste and where do you put it? Well, the earth is full of lots of offal. It doesn't give a shit about us. What's below us, below your feet right now, a couple of miles down, would kill you instantly. It's cyanide and lava and like benzene and all kinds of horrible shit. So if you injected, refined nuclear material that far down in the earth would just swallow it up and not care. Um, yeah. So I'm sorry, I just I'm catching up on the Iron Man suit was powered by that technology. Yeah, exactly. That was the idea, that it was a nuclear powered missile, minor nuclear thrust. So they were using filament to create a minor nuclear reaction, basically a hypersonic nuclear missile that doesn't have a nuclear payload. It was um, and let me, and insofar as the Ukraine thing, we'll talk more about this on Wednesday with Philip, because I will be leaving Kentucky at ass in the morning and arriving before my show about 7:30 and continue. I will do my show at 9. I might be exhausted, but we'll do it. Um, the stuff that we are giving to Ukraine to use, which is technologically outpacing the Russians and destroying ammo depots and all this kind of stuff, is materially, in terms of what the US military has the capability of using right now, 15 years old. Like, we're not giving them anything from the last decade of advancement. The javelins are cool and they're very useful, but and the HIMARS themselves are incredibly functional, but they are positively Cro-Magnon compared to what the US military has that it trains on and works with at all times in case of the worst possible problem. But the advances that they, in the process, peacetime military advances often trickle down to everybody else. Yeah, in case Russia captures it. Partly, Betsy, but also because we don't want them to know what's. Um, yes, Janelle, it's older stuff. The Right now we're testing the hypersonic missile, and it's more like a space race thing with the hypersonic missile. Those things aren't as important to the equation as people think they are. That's just mad. That's the mad argument, the mutual assured destruction stuff, that you want faster and faster nukes that no one's going to use really. But the let me give you an example. So the U.S. government currently, by all measures, has, and no one's seen it, but they didn't. It's like by the time we saw the stealth fighter, it was obsolete. Has cluster munitions with smart bombs in them. The Everybody has cluster munitions right now, and we certainly used some of them, in different wars over the last few years, and they were fairly dumb. They fly up over and they fall apart, like they burst open, and then there's a lot of little bombs and they all go flying, so they spread out and hit stuff. Think of the Jericho in Iron Man 1. The difference between like what you saw in that, what they don't quite get from you if you watch that movie, is that each of those cluster munitions is not just a grenade that falls off, which is how older cluster bombs worked, and how the Russian ones work, and how the Syrians work, and everybody else, China's work, is smart munitions, so that they fall out and then they all go to program targets. Each individual munition goes to a separate thing. A lot closer, but not quite as cartoonish as the four guys that were holding hostages in Iron Man 1, where he turns around and they're like holding guns to the heads of people, and it goes click like that, and they all four get hit, but the people are safe. It's mix those two in your head, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Um, uh, let's see. My kid's school is requesting that we send them in as part of school supplies. I'm not exactly comfortable with it. I read the reports. I didn't see the top of that, Christy, that reference, but remember, yeah, Trump used to think they were actually invisible. Yeah, I mean, thank God he was too stupid to understand this shit. It's like he would have given stuff away, but his own descriptions, like, what if, even if he tells them kind of what we're working on, that'll give them a tip off. There was always worries about that during the Cold War, especially. But Trump explaining these things would end up confusing them more. Tesla had a machine that would distribute electrical power through the air, no cables. He really didn't. Also, he was Genius was working on that before his death. It was an impossibility. Yeah, like wireless electricity isn't going to be the way, but permanent miniature nuclear batteries that power every small electronic device in our lives totally is. And the fact that it's that they're using currently, at least, using carbon-14 to do it, which is a resonant energy that's like it's a form of radiation we all experience all the time. And the volume of it isn't necessarily going to peak because of the number of things in our lives. As a matter of fact, it's going to go down because a certain amount of radiation is put off by just the amount of wires you got running around in your house. You remove all that shit. Imagine, I've been trying to tell people this for years, but there's going to be a day where you're going to have to explain to a child what a plug is. They're going to point to these funny looking holes in the wall, and they're going to go, "What are those?" And you're going to go, "Well, we used to grind up dinosaurs for power and cook them and burn and make steam, and that steam turned a turbine, and that ran electricity to the house, and electricity would come out through that hole that looks like a scared man being forced into fellatio, and then that would that would charge your phone for a little while." And they're going to go, "What the hell?" uh yeah. So you're in the same way that some people explain what an old phone plug looks like, what's that hole in the wall? That is where you used to plug the phone in, right? Will be in a Tesla Envision future? Yeah, but it will be the solution will be different than he thought. Because you have to understand, at the time he was doing it, there wasn't, this is pre-Moore's law, pre-circuitry. Like, he could imagine a future where computers would get more complex, I suppose, as a concept. But at that point, he was straight up working mostly with just electrical current. And so he was thinking in terms of electrical current getting from one place to another. How do we get it from one place to another? And there were no wires laid everywhere the way there are today, that ultimately were necessary for sort of the Edison system that the world is on right now. And that was necessary up to a point. In the same way that stone tools were necessary until you had bronze, and then bronze tools were necessary until you had iron. What do you think plastic dinosaur toys are made of? Yes, I agree. That's kind of that's the irony. Oh, the titanium dioxide and Skittles, that was another big story. Um, anyways, I look at me, and we just started chatting, and I went a half hour longer than I was originally planning to. The I'm gonna look at the chat right now. Uh, you needed two wires just to make the phone ring. Exactly. Back then, you wouldn't like Edison's politics. Um, I got news for you. If you were alive when Edison was alive, you'd probably be more in line with his politics than you think. I mean, he was awful on a lot of fronts. But a lot of modern people who've grown up in the modern era with a lot of the modern conveniences that did not exist before Edison's plan was adopted, or in the battle between him and Tesla and other people. It's not just that you don't understand how they felt or lived, but that in many ways you couldn't even comprehend it. Even if you went and lived in the woods and lived off the grid, you would be aware the entire time that a grid existed and you were living off of it. You can't judge historical figures on the same scale that you judge, behavior now, especially. And and that's true of each stage of humanity. You just can't do it. And the idea that you would is cartoonish, and it's also incredibly arrogant because you think, or most people, I'm not you in particular, but generally, people seem to think that the brain wave patterns and the emotional response to ideas and the intellectual problem solving ability that they have using current available information, um, and their experience in the modern world ports at all into any kind of previous, especially pre-industrial age. You you don't have the capacity to do it, nor would you kind of want to. You know what I mean? Any more than the people in the founding fathers era would want to go. How do I really know what it's like to be Cro-Magnon? It's silly. Humanity's been growing in fits and starts. We judge those things in the past that were bad, not based on the people that were engaged in them, but the activities themselves. Because I got news for you. If you were alive back then, more than likely you would have been a participant in or a benefit of or a victim of or whatever of a lot of those systems, and it would have been expected and normal. There's a tendency because of slacktivist characteristics in people nowadays where you can tweet your political ideas, that you would have been just as mouthy during the French Revolution or before the signing of the Constitution or even during that period, when you absolutely would have not. E- Especially if you had a family or anything to lose. Many of the biggest revolutionaries in history did so because they either found enough like-minded people that they were all committed to the same goal together, or quite frankly, they were just fucked. Or in like Karl Marx's case, uh, uh, in line with like Thoreau, a lot of those ideas, these revolutionary ideas and these thoughts and the anger that came from it were written from the warm side of a bay window while they ran up debts and they're, like, I mean, Marx had house servants. He even when he was broke, he borrowed money to like for his daughters to continue taking piano lessons because the idea was that they still had to be upper class. He used the N word a lot. Like there, your ideas today, quite frankly, don't apply. Even though, by the way, we're all born with perhaps a little bit of genetic instinct. That's still yet to be that family lines and family trees do have some sort of impact on who you are personality wise over time. That at the very least, you're born not knowing any of this shit, but you sure do pick it up quick. You pick up whatever the world you're in and how it works fairly quickly so you don't die in it. How you can survive, how you can find a mate, how you can keep yourself fed and not, fall off the edge of the earth. And uh, very few, very few people have a tendency to go, I know I might walk off the edge of the earth, but I'm going to give it a try. But, most people on Twitter think they would be Columbus, honestly. Cellular memories. Yeah, that's what they're talking about, is that there's some level of, because the idea is that your RNA breaks away from your DNA, floats around, sees what kind of person you are, sees what kind of experiences you have, see what kind of environmental toxins and experience, and then it clicks back in and your DNA replicates with that new information added to it. And therefore, what would be the purpose of that but to make sure that your offspring are as prepared for the current environment they are born into, and so it'd have to be a fairly quick thing. Like long-term evolution is one thing, but short-term evolution, family to family, is not that, wouldn't be that weird. Scientifically, it would make a lot of sense for almost every animal to do that. I think probably in domestication of animals beyond our, early domestication of dogs and cats versus when we started breeding them, which is another step forward. The early domestication is a sign that, dogs and cats at least did that to some extent and learned fairly quickly in a couple of generations instinctually to gather around humans. Yeah. Sharia law for Alabama. Well, while I've often said that in the United States of America and in many countries, time travel is possible. You just have to get on the wrong bus. Elizabeth says, for a super chat, necessity is the mother of invention. Truer words were never said. Although, I would also say, if necessity is the mother of invention, panic is the father of its demise. The you have to understand that the invention process, the skilled moving forward, requires a lot of fine tuning. You can only duct tape the boat together so long. And if your response every time there's an emotion, every time there's a problem is an emotional one, that's what you're going to use. You're going to go, just duct tape it, fix it now, because I'm focused on you got to fix it now. Well, most quick fixes suck. There used to be this thing, and it still exists, I'm sure, that there are three traits when you order a product or a project done. Um, uh, Cheap, fast, and sorry, cheap, fast, and good. And you can only have two at a time. You can have it cheap and good, but it's not going to be fast. You have it fast and good, but it's not going to be cheap. And and you can have it. What was the one I missed? Yeah, you can have it fast and cheap, but it's not going to be good. Mm-hmm. Panic is the father of the demise of invention. Right. Yeah. If necessity is the mother of invention, then then panic is the father of its demise. That could be a Sparksism. But we must, and again, the calm, non-panicked support of climate action is the missing element. We are not short of people who are hand-wringing and pulling their hair out and wrenching their garments and screaming at the sky. We're not short of those people anymore. We might have been for a while, but we're not now. And now you get points for screaming about it. Not solving it. I mean, I would argue that the real climate activists are the people working on carbon capture and other stuff, or trying to develop an engine that runs more efficiently, or developing electric cars and that use solid state batteries that don't have lithium in them, that kind of stuff. Those are the real climate activists. Marching is great. But that's for the rest of us who aren't in the invention game. But if you can invest in something, and one of the things you can do with your investments is to point in that direction, which is the whole ESG conversation, which we've had with Glenn Beck's bullshit for a long time, is that's the other thing. So that's the second tier. Instead of marching, where's your money go? Does your money go towards the solution, or does it go towards the problem? If you can move your money from the problem to the solution, hey man, that's a long-term, daily, moment-to-moment, dollar-by-dollar investment in the actual fix of the problem. You couldn't march that much. Greta Thunberg can't give that many speeches. She can't give enough speeches equal to the UAE, you know, their own, shifting their money from, hedge funds that focus on petroleum to hedge funds that focus on renewables. And it certainly isn't true of like pension funds, and government spending, like in both the rescue package and the infrastructure package. Because the DoD has recognized that climate change is a real threat, both to their bases, many of which have ports. And so if the water rises and we've got ships that, not only can bad ships come in closer because the water's higher, but also the docks that we have to service them have to be modified, and that's billions of dollars of costs and measurement and work, and they have to be resilient and repaired and blah blah. There's a lot of shit. That kind of investment where somebody like Biden comes in and goes, look, we're gonna move a little bit of this money away from there and move it over to here. Every second of every day, that is making an impact. Hal, don't you think we are going to need government intervention to achieve a solution to climate change? It's been about a half a century since we've been hearing all this. Yes, but a half a century of different talk. It's been about 22 years since we've really heard, like, I mean, Earth Day was really about plastic when it started, and in the 70s they were talking about a coming ice age. We took out all the aerosols, the chlorofluorocarbons, and that actually caused, you know, we were artificially cooling the planet. The whole hole in the ozone thing layer was venting the heat out of the sky. The whole Once we patched the ozone layer, it shrunk. Remember the whole? I mean, we lived with that. The ozone layer. There's a hole in the ozone layer. We're gonna have an ice age. And then we stopped using a lot of those things, outlawed them all over the world. People stopped making them, and it shrunk so small that it's not even part of the conversation anymore. And now we've been talking about heat. Where we're going, there are no roads. Exactly. So it in no way have we been fighting global climate change as a concept for 50 years. Not in that respect. Not certainly about a rise in temperature of a degree or two of Celsius as a conversation. That's, I mean, maybe it started with an inconvenient truth, was the primary beginning of the conversation around that kind of climate change. And the predictions, um, let's see, of those. Let's see. Okay, let's see. The Yeah, so we're talking like when was it came out? Yeah. So it was 12 years ago. 12. Oh my gosh. Audrey, thank you so much. Bless you. Thank you guys for supporting the morning show. Like I said, it's very different from the the afternoon show, but sometimes it's better to have these long form conversations about this stuff. Thank you so much. Look at that. La. Oh wait, wrong side. La. I was facing the wrong way. My screen flips. Where? Okay, never mind. Let's see. I'm trying to see the. Okay, here we go. Try to open this up. I'm trying to find a couple of links and I'll show you what I mean. Yeah. This was, when was this? This is 2017. There we go. One second. Let me try and bring this up. So this is there was in an Inconvenient Truth. There was while it was happening, the measure of the beginning of the the 2000s, that there was a pause in global warming, that it had actually started cooling a little bit, and or at least it wasn't growing as rapidly. And I mean, this is a single study follow-up, but they believe it's a measuring error. Um, but ultimately, the mean temperatures, and this is also part of what the UN climate group came up with in their report, was that we are increasingly looking at the developing world and increasing the technological advancements in the developing world. And a lot of the developing world, one of the reasons why it took so long to develop was because the environment is incredibly inhospitable. So we've been mainly tracking in terms of regular temperatures that we used to read this, and not just like sticking stuff in the ground and seeing what the temperature was like thousands of years ago. But in the last 1,000 years, the upper soil issues that we have, we've been judging it based on largely the developed world, because that humans develop where there's consistent weather, where there's more resources, where it's more agriculturally fulfilling than deserts and the like. But now we've got climate measures that are way out in Western China, that are in all over India, that are in parts of Africa that were inhospitable or impossible to see, or we have satellite views of those areas, and those are now being factored in. And factoring those things in will raise the mean temperature overall, because you're now adding hotter temperatures to the measure that we've been using for a while, and that kicks it up. So that's this past year, 2016, we'll see a mean global temperature of nearly 1 full degree warmer than the period of 1951 to 1980. Now, it was hotter before that, because then you're using grounds like measurements, where how trees lived and died and all that kind of stuff previous to that. This is half of the temperature increase target set by the Paris Agreement. And again, part of this is mixing it in with, we are taking temperatures from places we didn't take temperatures from before, and those places are in general way hotter. Still, there's a heat rise, no question, and there is an impact, but that's part of what they're seeing. So, additionally, just as Gore's film depicted, carbon dioxide levels have continued to rise. Carbon dioxide has now crossed the 400 parts per million mark, the level for 6,000 years previous to about 1900 was rarely more than 280 parts per million. And that's the trapping. And also methane, greenhouse gases specifically, not just carbon dioxide, have the trapping mechanism that is creating the acute heat that the world is experiencing, but these like heat waves are caused by, even in the UK. This is trapped heat. In the decade since 2006, Gamble says our understanding of climate change has evolved, but the data doesn't challenge the basic conceit of the film. What we've learned are details how warm ocean water is playing a role in both sea and ice sheet retreat, details in how the glacier and ice sheet flow speeds and thickness on Earth are changing, details on this. Okay. Additionally, notes Arctic sea ice continues to shrink in extent and thickness, setting new summer minimum records in 2007 and in 2012, and showing a dramatic reduction this fall relative to the rate which it should be growing. Greenland is losing mass at the rate of 200 billion tons per year. Antarctica is losing mass at about half that rate, and the world's mountain glaciers are shrinking. That is not to say an inconvenient truth got everything right. Scambo says that in an effort to shock the public into action, the film did exaggerate some dire scenarios, a bit of over the top to depict much of Florida sinking beneath the rising waters. Again, I always said that Florida will be underwater, but it'll be under like a foot and a half of mosquito-infested squishy water, not fucking making it like Atlantis, which is what most people think of. Like you're going to go scuba diving to go look at what's left of Miami. Someone open a window, the wind's trapped. That's argument like maybe we should all start using hairspray again. It was a bit over the top. This will take centuries again. The model used was the most pessimistic. The recent Science News article highlights some of the other points in film that scientists might revise today. For example, the movie used horrifying footage of 2005's Hurricane Katrina and suggests that climate change was the cause of frequent and more intense hurricanes. But since then, hurricane frequency has decreased and the storm's intensity hasn't yet grown significantly. Gore also predicted that the film within a decade there will be no more snows on Kilimanjaro. University of Massachusetts scientist Doug Hardy, who was co-author of the 2002 Science article upon which Gore's statement was based, notes that the former vice president was taking a little literary license, since research shows that snow cover has come and gone seasonally there for at least a century and a half, but the larger point that the mountain's glaciers rapidly are vanishing is essentially on the mark. My latest thinking, based on observations and measurements made on 19 ascendants of the mountain, is that some prominent glaciers will indeed be essentially gone by 2020. This included the Furtwähler Glacier, the only one entirely within the crater, and the most on the south side, no, all the ice on Kilimanjaro will not be gone then. Some portions of the northern ice field are likely to be more than 40 meters thick in 2020, and some are likely to be there in 3 to 4 decades. Nonetheless, all the glaciers on the mountain continue to shrink, becoming smaller in area and thinning. Aesthetically, it will be a very different mountain without the glaciers. That You have to understand there is it's you can't treat a long-term diet issue with stomach stapling and fen-phen and have it be healthy. You can't. People need to stop asking, like, climate change is not an app. Can't swipe right and solve it. It's going to be incremental. And because we're so behind the 8 ball solving it, it's going to seem worse before it gets better. But it's the constant, sometimes, and this is the point I would argue, and I'll end with this so I can go. I even stayed the whole extra hour. That if you're going to convince the people that need convincing, you are going to have to measure your response and coax and entice, because you are dealing with a feral cat in terms of people who don't believe in climate change or our impact on the environment. It's not going to happen overnight. You can't just throw a noose around their neck, pop them in a cage, and hope they become a lap cat immediately. It's gonna take time and trust. And part of that is calmness, resolve, and a faith in that what you're saying is actually true. And the problem with the exaggerations that were in Inconvenient Truth, while the overall idea is right, was that the fear-mongering that drove some people to action, the people that Inconvenient Truth, I would argue, drove to action were people who were already primed for that action in the first place and didn't need to see the scary stuff like, it's going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen like within 5 years. We're going to see it to get activated. It would have been enough for those people to say, your children are going to watch their children get sick because the environment will be inhospitable to them. That would have been enough to move them. Not Florida's going to be underwater like Atlantis, which nobody bought at the time, but also even the ones who did, they didn't even picture it in a reality. They're like, it's not going to, I mean, it's swampy, but it's just going to get swampier and be completely useless. Which again, to all our dear GOP friends, have fun getting insurance as you guys refuse to do anything while the rest of us are trying to clean it up so it doesn't happen to you. It's the second factor after the sun. Exactly. And we don't have impact on the sun. You can go, well, the sun, it's getting hotter because with the Earth wobble and where we're moving through the galaxy. Well, fine, that's true. But if we can mitigate it for our own health and safety over the 10 to 15 or 20 or 50 years or whatever that wobble affects things, so that our grandkids aren't dying of sun exposure, or that you have to go outside wearing a fire suit, then I think we have a moral responsibility to do that. Also, again, when you're talking to climate deniers and you're talking to people who don't want to buy in, or too afraid to buy in, or are just overexhausted and their willpower is all burnt out, just talk to them about pollution. Just recognize that they can't get it. You're screaming English at a French tourist, and it's rude, and it isn't going to solve the problem. Do you want to solve the problem, or do you want to feel righteous? I would rather contribute to the solving of the problem. You want coal plants? Cool. But they should only be used for smelting plants and factories, while the rest of us try not to contribute to the problem by getting the most efficient vehicle we can use and not having to use oil and gas to get around if you don't have to, which you don't, increasingly. And the first adopters and the people who will buy electric cars will bring the price down for everybody. If you'll recall, if you go back and watch old movies, not everybody had a car. Go watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. It was a big deal. And then eventually everybody had a car. And then everybody had two cars, and it was weird. And now every member of a family will have a car. That wasn't normal when this shit all started. And it won't be normal when electric cars are. You're going to spot a Tesla and you go, wow, look at that. We saw one. And then you're going to see another one. And then you're going to see the Ion or whatever, or the Hyundai, or or the Volt, and you're going, oh, there's a lot of these around. And then one of your buddies is going to have an electric F-150 and the house generator thing, and he's going to go, yeah, we had a storm, the power went out, we just plugged it into the house and ran the house while it was happening. We were great. Then we'll catch on and roll. Same. I mean, we didn't have gas stations when this shit started. Go watch an old 30s and 40s horror film. It always starts with somebody running out of gas. There weren't gas stations. The engines sucked. Do you want to stay with that? No. You didn't want to stay with that. You're not going to want to stay with this. Technology will continue to move forward. The question is, can we mitigate the damage we're doing while the technology catches up to the problem we're actually trying to solve? That's all we're asking. And some of the "how dare you" stuff is not, it doesn't work with the people it needs to work with. You're just, and again, it's one thing to preach to the choir, it's another thing to shame the choir. You're not being choiry enough. Like, doesn't help. Anyways, I'm gonna go. I will see you guys later. I was gonna do a half show, and then I did a whole show because I love you guys. And it was a good conversation, and I'm glad. But I will be back on this afternoon at the regular time. But I will be, no, I'll be on at an earlier time. I'm on the East Coast, so more than likely I'm gonna do it at the regular time, like in between. So I'll start at like 4:30, 5 o'clock. It'll be a little while. I think 5 o'clock for real because kid stuff. So 5 o'clock. Let's just call it 5 o'clock East Coast time. And then so I can get. I'll do an hour and a half. It'll be a little shorter because we're all going to eat. And if you'll recall, the last time I did the show from here, everybody was knocking on the door. Are you done yet? So, anyways, take care of yourself and take care of somebody else. And remember, there's so many options. You have a responsibility, ladies and gentlemen. You have a responsibility. Keep calm.